Thanks everyone for coming today. Really good to see everybody. I'm going to share my screen if I can, so that you can see some of my slides. What you're about today is it's an ongoing live research project. So we're literally having conversations about what I'm presenting to you every day, with many of you that are here today are working on this project with me. So a lot of what I'm going to say today to some of you might not be news. So let's crack on then. For those of you that don't know me, I've worked at the archaeology department in the university at Lampeter for 20 years now. And for a lot of that time, I've been involved with the Strata Florida Abbey research project. I've worked there as a co-director with colleagues, Professor David Austin, for 20 years or more. We've trained hundreds of students there. One or two of you are here today. You've conducted our field program, our annual field excavation. We've excavated dozens of trenches there in our phase 1 evaluatory scheme, looking in and around the Abbey, looking at the archaeology of the Cistercian monastery. About 2 years ago now, we managed to secure a research grant, which was fantastic, to continue our work. And that project is known as the Sacred Landscapes Project. And we're working in collaboration with colleagues in Lincolnshire who have a fantastic range of fenland edge monastic settlements. And they are acting as the main comparator for our landscapes of Strata Florida Abbey. And I will say a little bit about Strata Florida in a little while, because the main point of our project is to compare Abbey Cwmhir and Strata Florida. So we have colleagues working in Lincolnshire, we have colleagues working in universities, medieval Cistercian experts in and around the UK and Europe. But the part of the project I've been involved with now for a year, and certainly since March, since lockdown began, has been the Abbey Cwmhir Heritage Trust. Let's move on. So what we're aiming to do with the Strata Florida Sacred Landscapes Project is a sort of overarching analysis of how sacred landscapes are linked to cultural artifacts. So how the structures and motivations of power of those that were founding these important monastic landscapes, how those motivations of power manifest in the archaeological record. One of the elements, I won't go through all these points here, but these are our overarching narrative structures. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and I hope this comes out today in what we're talking about, is the continuity between the moment that the Cistercians arrive in rural mid Wales, around about the sort of late 12th century, this is what we're talking about today, the continuity between that and what went before. And we can see a lot of that in the referencing of the agency of the people that founded these Cistercian abbeys, and how they referenced their Celtic antecedents, their Welsh ancestry and past. So I'm really interested in early medieval and how that comes through into a fairly standard kind of Cistercian franchise. Now then, the project aims. When we started this, when we started lockdown, we had great plans, didn't we, Mel, to go out into the landscape and conduct quite a lot of survey and excavation. And what we were going to do was based on Golong Grange. Now, Golong Grange is the home grange of the Abbey, and it's outlined here in blue. And this was the focus for our investigation when we started. And we were aiming to do two things. The first thing was to conduct a desk-based assessment And that is a gathering together of, those of you that are archaeologists, gathering together of all of the information that we already know about a place. So we are consulting the Historic Environment Record, the National Monument Record, all of those data sets of information that we already know about. I'll come back to that in a minute. The second thing we were aiming to do was to look at to do some field survey. And this was going to be partly a training program and partly generating research data. Now, this map needs a little bit of explaining. The blue line that you can see here is the outline of Cistercian Grange as we know it from the Middle Ages. And this map, the blue line, was brought to us by David Williams, a great historian of the Cistercian settlement in Wales. And he mapped all of the Cistercian holdings in Wales. And he's done an immense amount of work looking at the historic records and publishing that. And his work forms the basis of everything that we do in this area. However, through the work at Strata Florida, it's become very clear that we can add more detail to his work at a kind of higher resolution. Some of the granges we worked on at Strata Florida, and I'll show you some in a minute, we've managed to refine his mapping and add a lot of detail to it. Go back a minute. So the orange line that you can see is our mapping. That's our addition to David Williams's Cistercian Grange. And this is work in action. We're currently mapping the boundary of that using a 12th century, well, early 13th century grant. And the outline in red there, just to clue you in, is the area that we've been conducting our field survey. It forms part of the Abbey Cwmhir Valley. And the abbey, if you can see right at the bottom here, this sort of patch of woodland, the Clywedog stream wends its way east-west, which is significant. So the abbey site is down in here, and the site we've been doing field surveys here marked in red. Now, just a very brief history. This is the hero of our story today, but we're still working a lot on this guy, so we won't be saying a lot about him, but he is the agency behind everything we're looking at. Cadwallon ap Madog, Lord of Meilenydd, was an early prince of the Lordship of Meilenydd. And Meilenydd was part of a range of cantrefs and commotes, these early sort of territorial units that formed the old county of Radnorshire. Now, he founded the abbey in 1176, and it was later colonised by monks from Whitland. But the problem is, we don't know much about what he intended to found at Abbey Cwmhir because we don't have any of his original surviving charters. So part of what I'm trying to do is work out what were his intentions in founding this abbey? What land was he actually giving? You know, what's the motivation behind his actions? Just to clue you in, this is a fantastic photo by, I've got lots of amazing graphics by colleagues today to show you. And the first of these is by Julian Ravis. I don't know if Julian's probably here today. He does a lot of drone survey for the project. Invaluable. This is Abbey Cwmhir Church. Facing east along the east-west valley. Let's go back a minute. The church was one of the largest in Wales at the time, and this is quite remarkable. Questions remain as to whether or not it was actually ever finished, but it would have been, if it had been finished, the largest abbey church in Wales. One of the things we were going to do at the beginning of the season was to excavate part of this site. But COVID and other reasons, we're going to have to come back to this at a later date. Julian has conducted this fantastic drone survey. It's a photogrammetric survey, so it measures heights of the ground, and we can create this earthwork survey. And I'll not go through this because this is Julian's work and he's actually published this. But can you see, this is the Abbey Church here, facing east-west. And we know virtually nothing about the conventional layout of this abbey, apart from we can start to see earthworks here coming around this end. And this is probably the Abbey's precinct enclosure in here. And then there are hints in this area of the kind of buildings you'd expect to see in a Cistercian layout. You'd have a refectory, kitchens, tanneries, all of those sort of domestic buildings, a hospital building, lavatories. So in this area is a whole other story waiting to be excavated. And then we've got a post-dissolution, I'm going to call it modern, but it's a post-dissolution farm plonked on top of the Abbey site. Excitingly, in 2018, do we all remember the beast from the east, followed swiftly by the great drought? This allowed our colleague Toby Driver, who works as the aerial survey officer at the Royal Commission based in Aberystwyth, to fly much of the summer and discover dozens and dozens of new sites as parch marks. So as the ground dries out due to drought, we can start to see these linear features which comprise a ditch or a negative feature. I've put some timing on the slide, so it probably shows I'm going too slowly, but it's worth looking at this in detail. Can you see these linear features? There's a diagonal going across. Toby interprets these as possible garden features. And we know that Abbey sites would have had formal garden features in terms of orchards, fruit beds, herb gardens. But this possibly relates to a post-dissolution formal gentry garden. I mean, can you see these tiny green, dark green dashes here in this area, and then some more here? These are east-west pits that probably are grave pits, so that this area was probably part of the monastic graveyard. And this is all lying underneath the current farm at the moment. Just the last aerial photo for this section. This is, at the bottom here, is Wenallt Farm. And it's literally, I guess it's under half a mile to the west of the Abbey Church. Now, if you're really eagle-eyed, can you see there are two double ditches running across here? This looks to me like a double-ditched enclosure, and there are possibly rectilinear features down the bottom left. And there are other features coming down that cross the stream going across the middle. I wouldn't mind betting, but this is very speculative, that this could be an outer precinct, because this is right at the end of part of the valley. But until we can get access here to do geophysical survey and or excavation, we don't know what these features are. It's possible that these are a routeway or trackway going around the west end of an outer precinct of the Abbey. The diagonal going across the top of the picture is probably a trackway that comes down from the woods. It's quite a steep slope there. So this was our original intention, to excavate, to do geophysical survey in and around the Abbey. But I'm really a landscape archaeologist, so I was quite looking forward to getting stuck into the wider landscape and to start mapping that Grange boundary. This is the area that we, in September, we went to and we conducted a walkover field survey. We only had one day in the field in the end because of COVID and because of the weather. And it acted partly, as I was saying, partly as a training scheme and a kind of participant for volunteers to come along, get trained in, field survey techniques. And you won't be able to see on your screens, but underlying these sites is a really high resolution drone survey. It's over 200 acres, so it's it's a lot of work done by Julian. And this gives us a topographical map, all the lumps and bumps for this Abbey Cwmhir Valley. We've started to map lots of new sites through this technique. It's worth pointing out that there are 4 farms in this valley which are ruined, okay, and they will also be surveyed as part of the fieldwork programme. And they sit as hut platforms. Some of them have got ruined buildings on top of them, but set within garden enclosures and kind of other level platforms and linked by a series of trackways. I will come back to those because the million-dollar question is, how old are these farms? When did they go out of use? But more importantly, were they medieval? Were they part of the Cistercian farming regime in this area? We surveyed 2 sites in September, one up here, site 1, which we'll have a look at in a minute, and another site, very similar, just down the slope. So we'll have a look at those in a minute. This is site 1. Some of you here today will be in this photograph because you were there surveying with your tape measures. It's a level platform site. You can see the people here are stood on a kind of rectangular level platform set lengthways into the slope. The incline here represents a stream, which is quite useful if you're conducting agricultural processes. And can you see there's like an earthwork bank, which encloses quite a small area here. It shows up extremely well on photogrammetry. Oh, there's the photogrammetry. You can see that it's a really good way of surveying sites in an aerial way. You can see the irregular kind of enclosure, the flat platform, the spring here. One of the million-dollar questions about this site is they are quite well known from this area. There are quite a lot of upland sites like this relating to early agricultural practice. They're not massively unusual. This one has not been recorded before, so this is a new find. And part of the work we're doing is enhancing the historic environment record. The question is, though, how old is this kind of site? They very rarely get excavated, and they even more rarely have documentary evidence relating to them. These are the kind of field records that we are creating. This is a Clwyd Powys Archaeological Trust site visit record form. And they're good because they're a formal prompt for us to record in an empirical manner the size, the shape, the type, the elevation of our sites, the ownership, the condition, the land use, the vegetation, all that kind of thing. But the description field is the most important part because we have to make an interpretation about what we think is going on here. Is this site related to monastic agriculture, or is it a later encroachment onto the upland common in a sort of a non-regular way from easily the post-dissolution period? Well, here's a little clue to what might be going on. And because that's right in the, I'll try and make it a bit bigger so you can see some of the detail on it. Right, now then. This is the tithe map for Cwmhir parish. Let me get it right so that you can see it a bit closer up. Yeah. Right, let me zoom in so you can see, because this is a clue to right. Now then. This is a clue to the site that we've just seen its use. The site that we've just seen is situated up here, okay? If I was extremely well prepared, I would have put a nice dot and a label there, but the site is up here. And you'll see that from the tithe maps here are quite late, dating from, I think, the 1890s, which is quite late. That platform enclosure site is in Cwmhir, Sheep Walk. And you'll see that below you've got Llanachdirion Sheep Walk, you've got Gelenin Sheep Walk, and then you've got Cwmhir Sheep Walk. Cwmhir Sheep Walk is the domain sheep walk. The sheep that grazed this parcel of land belonged to the monks themselves. These other sheep walk would have been, the sheep on these parcels would have belonged to the individual farms for which they're named. And then those farms would pay rents in kind to the abbey. So Cwmhir Sheep Walk. Now, it's tempting to describe a site that we've just seen like that as a Hafod site. And those of you that are familiar with Welsh landscapes know that a Hafod is a seasonally occupied sheep grazing site. And some of you that are here today are actually looking into this in more detail for us so that we can be more precise about what I'm about to say. A Hafod is only occupied seasonally. So you would herd sheep to this area in the summer, let them graze in this unenclosed area, and then you would bring them back down to the farm in the winter to overwinter them at a lower elevation. And this is a form of transhumant farming agriculture known across the whole of Europe. It's particularly prevalent and well known in the Alps, the Alpine region. So a lot of classical historians have written about taking sheep thousands of feet up into the upland pastures and then bringing them, herding them all back down in the winter. It still operates the same now in the Cambrian Mountains, but farmers conduct it with quad bikes and tractors, not staying up there themselves. So this could be a Hafod site. Apart from the fact that Cwmhir farm is literally only 3 minutes walk away and at an only slightly lower elevation. So that brings into question the seasonality of it. If we call that site a Hafod, or describe it as a Hafod, whether it's medieval or post-medieval or whatever, was it really seasonally occupied if your main farmstead was literally 3 minutes walk away? Now, interestingly, the other site that we recorded, I'm not going to show you, but it's very similar, is down here. Again, it's a hut platform. There's a small rectilinear earth bank enclosure around it. But look where it is. It's not on the sheep walk. It's in this parcel of land, which belongs to Cwmhir again. So if we call this a Hafod because it's on the sheep grazing land, would it be right to call this, to describe this also as a havod when it's not necessarily on sheep grazing land? So these are kind of technicalities that we are dabbling with at the moment. What's our terminology going to be? How are we going to interpret these uplands platform sites and put them in a proper context? One of the things that we've done that is somewhat helpful is aspect analysis. And again, if I'd have been super organized, I would have put a nice dot on here for you. Our site that we're talking about is up here at the top of the screen, just to the right of, you see this trackway with the green blobs on it? It's just to the right of that, near the top. If we tip this up, this digital elevation model, you can see that the site in question is quite high elevation and it's north facing. It's just on just below a ridge that faces north. So it would have had very low sunlight levels in the winter. So that's it. It's not definitive, but it's kind of it's a very deterministic empirical way of suggesting that that site at least was seasonally occupied. You wouldn't want to be living up there in the winter in weather like this. And if you were, you would have built it on a south facing or west facing slope, I would hazard a guess. Anyway, so this is a useful form of aspect analysis that we can do. So we can create digital elevation models using our drone data, and then we can drape the information that we've got on top of them. Anyway, moving on. What have I done to my... Sorry, let's move on. Now, let's talk a little bit about putting that into a context, because what I'm really interested in is comparing Abbey Cwmhir, the lands of Abbey Cwmhir, with those of the lands of Strata Florida. Strata Florida was founded by Rhys ap Griffith, and he's the other hero of our story today. He annexed Ceredigion in the middle 12th century and founded, well, actually, he co-founded Strata Florida in 1165, where a surviving grant gives a small group of land around Cors Caron. Now, a remarkable thing happened in 1184. So Rhys went about establishing a very stable and politically complex state. The late 12th century was quite a turbulent period. The Normans were pushing in from the Marcher lordships on the east and from the south in Pembrokeshire. And the lineage of Rhys ap Griffith, who was Lord of Deheubarth, the early kingdom of Deheubarth, resisting that Norman incursion for decades, for a very long period. His reign became a period of virtual stability for Deheubarth. He had many, many offspring who eventually, after his death, managed to undo his good work by squabbling with each other and murdering each other, but that's a whole different story. He made an enormous grant to Strata Florida in 1184. And this is a really interesting event, of which we have a very small entry about in the chronicles, the Brita Tywysogion, the contemporary account of history at this time. Now, in 1184, Rhys was at the royal court of Henry II in July of that year. He'd made an accord with Henry II. And in 1171, Henry II had become so fed up with the warring Welsh and overly concerned about the de Clare family in Ireland that he made Lord Rhys justiciar over the whole of South Wales. This put Rhys in charge of all of the, what we call the minor royals of South Wales, including Cadwallon ap Madog, our founder of Abbey Cwmhir. So the relationship between those two contemporaries is quite interesting. Rhys was, by becoming justiciar, was one of the former feudal agents in Europe at that time. He was an extremely important man. In 1184, he was at the royal court in July, but a more important thing happened in 1184. He went to Llansanfraid Cwmhir, which is just on the east bank of Rhyadr. So it's on the, sorry, the west bank of Rhyadr. So it's in the other side of the Wye from Rhyadr. This is Llansanfraid Cwmhir. Now, Llansanfraid Cwmhir is, it has a church, Llansanfraid, so the early medieval church of St. Bridget, which is interesting because there's also a holy well there. Bridget is often associated with, she's an early medieval saint. She's often associated with holy wells, healing water, and also on prominent routeways and trackways associated perhaps with diplomatic travel or with pilgrimage. So this is a significant river crossing at the time. Fantastic holy water stoop at the bottom there, medieval period, but probably Norman period, probably not early medieval. And then the Victorian Church of Llansanfraid. What was Rhys doing here? He's outside Deheubarth now, and he's right on the edge of the Eastern March. He's on the border of lands with Cadwallon. Let's have a look, see if I can get the map of that up, because this is an event worth thinking about. Now then, pardon my maps because this is literally work in progress. What we've got here is the Kingdom of Deheubarth over here in the west, depicted in this sort of a beige colour. And the area in pink is basically a simplified version of the Lordship of Maelienydd. The red line, the boundary that we can see, is Strata Florida land. And this is what Rhys was here to do in 1184. He assembled at Llansanfraid Cwmhir to grant this enormous territory to Strata Florida. It's over 80,000 acres. And we believe that it is the largest monastic holding in Great Britain. It's an enormous tract of upland sheep grazing. The boundary itself was given in the grant. We don't have the original surviving grant. It survives in a later in Speximus, a 14th century document. The boundary itself is over 80 miles long and is given in a form of a perambulation, a boundary clause. And those are known from the Anglo-Saxon period onwards as a list of place names in order that can be read out, but strikingly can also be walked in a kind of a performative act of boundary making. So even today, people still beat the bounds of various parish or manorial holdings. And those events would be attended by the appropriate landowners, the appropriate elite attendees and lawmakers of the time. And it's a way of establishing and consolidating those boundaries in all the people concerned. Now, Rhys was here when he made this grant at Llansanfraid Cwmhir. He's outside of Deheubarth. He's in someone else's territory. He's with an army. His army is with him and his sons are with him as well. And presumably their retainers and a number of other elite and important witnesses to make this event. If we look at the archaeology of this, this is so sad. Lord Rhys is attributed with building the castle at Rhyadr. But Lord Rhys did not build the castle at Rhyadr because that is definitely not in his territory. That's a Norman foundation. The castle that Rhys built is this. It's Tomen Llansan Ffraid. It's a classic motte that would probably have had a bailey with it, and it's next to the church. And this is probably what was thrown up by his army at the time in 1184, or perhaps earlier. It's been very much denuded. It was scheduled, amazingly, because it's in such poor condition. And it's in a really sorry state now. It's tucked behind some garages and a school, you can see. But this site, this event is so important and it's so unrecognised, it's worth thinking about. Rhys is granting the biggest estate the Cistercians own in someone else's territory with his army. It's a performance. What he's doing is an act of state making. It's a performative act of placemaking. And if you think about it, this would have taken many, 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 many years even of negotiation. People would have had to go out to these territories. They would have had to negotiate, browbeat, purchase, marry, to be able to consolidate this single block of estate in Rhys's name. It's quite a remarkable feat of state making. If I zoom out a little bit, Rhys was the first Welsh lord to build castles in stone. He had a castle building program, which in a formerly non-cash society is a remarkable feat. Where did he get the money from? How did he raise cash for this? But if you look at one of the conclusions we've come to with the Strata Florida project is that the reason for granting a lot of the land in and around Strata Florida was as a replacement for the early class church at Llanbadarn. It's taking a lot of his Celtic antecedents and placing it into a new structure, a new framework, a new Cistercian framework. Rhys also founded Tally Abbey, which he granted to the Premonstratensians down near Llandilo. And there was a major class church at Llandilo. So we can see that also as a kind of continuity, a replacement, but a continuity of the early class church, which had been wiped away by the Norman diocesan system. Now this brings us to Cadwallon. And I'm doing a lot of work on Cadwallon at the minute because he's an extremely interesting chap. Cadwallon is a contemporary of Rhys's, and he can see Rhys's state-making empire. He can see the years of negotiation taking place here, and he founds his own abbey, which gives us this boundary. Can you see underneath if I zoom in, can you see underneath the very faint, and this is kind of the point I'm going to finish on because we've had 45 minutes. Can you see the faint green lines? Nope, not that one. The green underneath are the parish boundaries. If I switch that off. So we've got Llanbadarn Fynydd parish. We've got Llanano parish. We've got Llanbista parish. And we've got St Harmon parish. So the land that he's granting covers parts of all of those 4 parishes. It excludes the parts that have the parish churches in them because Cistercians were not allowed or could not grant parish churches because they were part of this parochial diocesan system. They were not within their purview to own parish churches. So they've granted the portions of the church of the parishes that do not belong, that are not part of that parochial system. In St Harmon parish, this area is known as Class Harmon, and it turns out that St Harmon is an early class church. this is where we're up to now with this project. We're starting to think about the relationship, the political and cultural context of the formation of these grants, these lands. So while we're out measuring and thinking about earthworks sites and you know, whether or not they are medieval Havodith or whether or not they are even medieval or not, we're also thinking about the higher level context of what was the political authority behind these grants. Was Cadwallon, for instance, influenced by the work of Rhys and thinking, well, I would like to make a grant that has an antecedent. I will give part of the parish of St. Harmon because of its former class status, that high authority, high power, early medieval church down in here. So this is where we've got to. We are conducting more field work. The Abbey Cwmhir Heritage Trust are continuing fieldwork and survey over the winter so that we can establish a body of work that can influence the historic environment record, but also our desk-based assessment and our historical research is starting to look at the motivations and the relationships, the agency behind estate giving and placemaking. And kind of, I think that's where I should finish for today, because we could go on for hours. We've got a very large GIS with lots and lots of data in it, and lots of people keep sending me more data. So as you can see, it's an ongoing project, and there's lots to think about. So thank you very much indeed.